galore. All aboard.
How'd you do? They're a darling little pair, and they ride most anywhere. Then they'll turn as if they're coming back to you. Pretty darling, trusty friend, on them you always can depend. And we made them to be loved by girls like you.
Kit and her pony caboodle come with everything you see. They're from Ideal.
I'd like to go somewhere.
You need a caring bear. If you open the cover and take my hand, we're off to the Care Bear land. Here's Friend Bear and Wish Bear, Good Luck Bear, and me. Yes, Grumpy, and love a lot. We'll see.
I'll tell you, if you tip your hat to a lady and you have another hat on top of your head,
You do.
then you've got to tip that hat. But if you're in synagogue, I guess you couldn't tip that hat.
No, I think you leave it on.
You know, that isn't a hat.
What is
That's
it?
a yarmulke.
It is.
And we're going to be talking about a holiday, a holy day, that is going on today, and another holiday that is going to be coming up at the beginning of next week. And for some of you, it's going to be a new word. And the word is Sukkot. And here is a picture of a Sukkot, a modern picture. And do you know what it is? It is, if I understand it correctly, a harvest celebration. Is that right?
Right.
And Charlotte ought to know because she comes to us from the only National Museum of Jewish History, American Jewish history in the entire world.
Right.
And we have it here in the Delaware Valley.
Right here in Philadelphia.
Isn't that spectacular? I think that is fun. Now, we're not going, we've just had Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
Which is what?
That's the New Year. The
That's
Jewish
the
New Year.
And that was last week. Today is Yom Kippur.
Right.
Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes, right.
And what is Yom Kippur, Charlotte?
It means the Day of Atonement, when we atone for our sins.
So this is a day that is set aside for us to think of our shortcomings and make our apologies to God and man.
And it's the most solemn day of the Jewish year.
And that is today. So all of our friends who are Jewish friends, boys and girls, are all in a very somber day. But coming up shortly is going to be a happy day.
Right, Wednesday night.
And that is?
That's the beginning of Sukkot.
Sukkot. And what is Sukkot, Sue?
It means the festival of the booths, and it's a time when we rejoice because of the harvest. Here's a picture of one.
This is how it would be in a synagogue.
Right. Most synagogues have a sukkah, and some people even build them in their backyards.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? And it's kind of a booth made right for a festival, right?
Right. It's not a very large booth. It can be very small, and what you can do is eat your meals in it, and you hang fruits and vegetables and make it very decorative. It's really very beautiful.
So in the days, and probably today, in Israel, they celebrate the harvest, as we have harvest home here in the United States, about the same time of the year.
As soon as Yom Kippur is over, then people start to build the sukkah, so that by Wednesday night it's all ready.
Right. I've had people give me different pronunciations. The new pronunciation for all the young children learning it is Sukkot.
Sukkot. Right, that's how they say it in Israel today.
Sukkot. Now, I had a little yarmulke on here. I'm going to take this off. I just want to show you something very fancy. This is...
That's a kippah. It's the same thing as a yarmulke. A yarmulke is Yiddish, and a kippah is Hebrew.
Now, the shawl, do all the men wear a shawl?
Well, if you're real religious, if you're traditional, some men do and some men don't. It's up to you.
The shawl symbolizes?
Well, there's something in the Jewish religion that says that you have to affix this, which is called tzitzit, on the four corners of your garment, and since that's the way they used to have it, you know, in the biblical times. But we can't walk around that way anymore, so we put it on a shawl.
On a shawl.
Right.
Beautiful thing. Very quickly, I want to find out why we have this, Charlotte.
All right, that's one of the species that we keep in the sukkah, and that really is a citron, and we have to keep it in some kind of cotton or paper or something because we can't blemish it. And we keep it in a container, and we call it an etrog, and it's in an etrog container.
And this will be then ready for the Harvest Home Festival.
Right, that's right.
Today is Yom Kippur. Harvest Home is coming together. Do you know there was a little 6-year-old boy that celebrated Sukkot in New York City in 1835 with his family by the name of Strauss, and he became part of our American folklore. But you really do, because really every boy and girl in America knows Mr. Strauss. Yep, because he left New York City, taking all his traditions with him, and went to a place called San Francisco during the gold rush. And tucked under his arms, he had a couple of bolts of cloth. One of those bolts of cloth was canvas. And he found that the miners who were mining there were wearing out their pants. And so he said, I'll solve that problem. And he began to make pants with canvas and took little rivets and riveted them all together. And you know what they called his pants? Well, his first name is Levi. And when he dyed those pants blue, put rivets on them, he called those pants Levi's. And so if you're wearing pants to school or pants to play that are like dungarees, they're really Levi's, invented by this man who was changing the face of what Americans wear. Part of our American folklore. Coming up next, we're going to find out about how some kids fight fire. And green, purple, and orange and blue. I can sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow too. Listen with your eyes, listen with your eyes, and sing everything you see. You can sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow, sing along. And sail something called gelt, and little chocolate figures that are also dressed up in tin foil that are known as the Maccabees. And they're all signs of a festival that is to begin next week, and it is called Hanukkah. And we asked Charlotte Paul to come in and share with us the story and the signs of Hanukkah. Charlotte, it's so nice to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Have you here again?
I enjoy it.
What is Hanukkah?
Well, Hanukkah is the story of the Maccabees, who were, that was a family, and they were fighting for the Jewish people in Jerusalem
Who were being persecuted
by the Syrians.
Right.
And the Syrians took over, and then they ruined the temple, and the Maccabees and the rest of the Jews had to clean up the temple. And when they did, they rededicated it with the menorah, and that's how we get the menorah in Hanukkah. And the oil lasted for 8 days, and that's why the holiday's 8 days long.
So Hanukkah is really a story of religious freedom.
Right, for everybody.
It's people saying, we'd like to have the right to worship. And as you know, a lot of times in history, people had to fight in order to have that right to worship. Now this is the menorah, and the festival lasts 8 days. And there's a candle for each day?
That's right, and then this one in the center.
All right, would you light that for us?
Sure, I will.
Now, the one you're lighting now really doesn't count, is that right?
It's called a shamash.
Which means...
It's a service candle.
Mm-hmm.
And you use that to light all the other candles.
Now, every day or every night do you light a candle?
Every night, just as the sun goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a special prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu L'chad L'kner Shel Chanukah. And we say that every night. See, I'm lighting all 8, but you only light one the first night.
They would be lit all on the 8th night.
Right.
Now, it's interesting. Did you tell me that this year, the 8th night of Hanukkah will be Christmas night?
That's right.
Isn't that interesting? So all the Jewish boys and girls and the Christian boys and girls will be celebrating this season all together. Now, this goes back in history to the temple. Now, they didn't have candles in those early temples.
They had oil. In fact, this one is something that they would have used, well, actually, not then. They would have used a little bit later. This has oil, and this hangs on the wall. Do you see how this
And the one in the middle would be the service candle.
Right, this one right here.
Now, I have seen some that are modern-made that still use oil, right?
This one was just made, and what's interesting about it is even though it's new, these little lamps that you put the oil in look just like the old ones that they used to use during those biblical times. And this is the one that you use to light the other ones. And this is a wick, so you put the oil in here, and you light all of the little lights.
Now, it's interesting that just as at Christmas time, Christian boys and girls will get gifts, there is a way to get gifts for Jewish boys and girls with something called the dreidel, which is a spinning top. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, how do you get a gift with this? Tell me. When you spin it around...
Well, you use money, usually. You use the Hanukkah gelt. Remember, we're talking about the gelt. This is really candy.
Good.
But you could use regular Hanukkah gelt, which is money. And everybody has a little pile of money, and then you spin it. Like this one is the same as the one you have. You spin it like this. And then wherever it lands, see, this says nun. That means you don't get any. So every one of these, this means gimel. That means you get all of them. And hey means you get half of the money in the pile. And shin... you put one in. And this is nothing.
It's also a trick to make you learn your Hebrew.
Well, a little bit.
Because you can't play if you don't know your Hebrew.
That's right, you have to know those letters.
Isn't it wonderful that this is a special time of the year for all of us to share in the wonderful spirit of this season that has belonged to man since the beginning of time? And as you hear some children singing carols, if you listen closely, going by a household or a synagogue, you might hear the song of the dreidel.
Don't take chances. Buckle up. Make your next ride and every ride a safe ride.
Channel 6 wishes you a happy Passover holiday.
And his magical ark, all aboard!
Hi, Wally. Hello, you ready? Yeah, just about. You ready for Cottontail? Well, yes. Here comes Peter Cottontail, hopping down the bunny trail. Hippity, hoppity, Easter's on its way. Hi, Captain Noah.
Good morning. How are you doing?
You like my fedora?
I like your chapeau. It looks very
How
nice.
about mine?
I don't know. It looks like one of Mrs. Noah's old ones.
Well, it's a skimmer.
Is that a skimmer?
Yep, I'm ready for Easter.
Hey, it's a super, super day, super weekend coming up for everybody's holiday. It's services, it's religion, it's all wrapped into one. It's a super weekend. And here on board this super ship, we're privileged to have on board the superheroes, the wonderful, fantastic superheroes, and all of their grand adventures. And when you're talking about superheroes, well, we've got superheroes like Mighty Mutt. How are you doing?
All right.
And to keep your head warm,
No.
you had your yarmulke on.
That's right, I do.
Because this is a very special weekend coming up, interestingly enough, for both Christians and Jews together. Not only are we celebrating Easter, but we're celebrating Passover. And Passover, it can be a story told by Charlotte Paul with just a glove.
Right. I have all the characters of Passover right on here. And this is the princess, and she's the one that picked Moses up out of the water.
Right.
And this is Aaron, who later became the high priest. That was Moses' brother.
Right.
And this is the Pharaoh that gave the Jews such a hard time in Egypt. And here's Moses. And this is Miriam, his sister.
And Miriam, his sister, kept watch
Right.
over
So
him as he grew up. Wonderful story of the Exodus. And that's what Passover is all about.
Right. Every year we retell the story of the Exodus, and we hand it down from generation to generation. My parents taught it to me, and now I'm teaching it to my children.
But it is the story that is told also in the book of Exodus, so even if it isn't told,
Same story. Right.
it is Passover. It's a story
Right.
of freedom. Now, tell me where the word Passover comes from in that story.
Well, it comes from the fact that the Jews were passed over by the angel of death when the firstborn son was going to be killed by putting blood on the doorpost of their house. And the angel of death just passed over, and that's how we get the name.
And it's as simple as that, where
Right,
Passover came.
right.
Now, Passover, a lot of Passover is told in the story. Now, do you pronounce it Seder?
Seder,
Now,
right,
there's several ways that it can be pronounced, but it's pronounced Seder.
right.
Tell me briefly about the Seder dinner.
Well, it's a very unusual holiday in that we really don't go to synagogue for this holiday. We really celebrate the holiday at home with all the family around the table.
Here's a picture.
And everybody has a book, and the book is called a Haggadah.
Right.
And it can be this design, or it can be, there are thousands and thousands of different books that tell the story. Every year we go over it again. But the center of the whole story is from the Seder plate, and that tells everything. For example, this says horseradish, so we put a dollop of horseradish because that represents the bitterness that the Jews went through when they were in Egypt. And this is the parsley, and that represents the coming of spring, and the harotzi. Now that is a mixture of raisins and apples and walnuts, and that represents the mortar of the bricks that the Jews made the pyramids and all the other buildings out of. The bitter herbs, that's also the bitterness that the Jews went through. And the shank bone represents the sacrifice that the Jews made in the temple. And the egg is a roasted egg, and that represents the fact that life goes around like an egg. No matter what happens, it just keeps going on.
The symbols of earth, the symbols of man, seem to crop up everywhere. Here we see the egg again going through. Now, matzah has a lot to do with Passover.
Yes.
I love matzah, fried matzah.
This is the only bread we can eat for 8 days. And the reason we eat this flatbread is that when the Jews were coming out of Egypt, and before they wandered through the desert, they grabbed their dough, and they didn't have time for it to rise. So they laid it down on flat bricks and stones, and that's all it rose. So that everything we eat during that 8 days is to remind us of the fact that we ate unleavened bread. So we can eat matzah whole, buttered, crumbled.
We can.
Yes, only matzah, no bread, and nothing
I could eat fried matzah for 8 days. I'd weigh a ton. I'd weigh a ton when we're done, Charlotte. But I think that is, if you've never had fried matzah, You should try it. It is delicious. It's a universal dish.
It is.
It is.
And it's the only real Jewish food. Matzah.
How many? I never thought of that.
Right, because every other food that people think is Jewish food really is food of the country where the Jews lived, but nobody else has matzah.
Isn't that fascinating? Passover is going to be celebrated. We'll start, I guess, Friday night, right?
Right, Friday
and
night.
then it runs for 7 or 8 days, depending how you celebrate it. So, as the Christian boys and girls are celebrating Easter season, the Jewish boys and girls are celebrating Passover. The fascinating wonder of this weekend. Coming up next, right here on board the Ark, we're going to take a look at how you can decorate an egg quite simply. What you could call it their birthday.
Yes, I remember
that. Was Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
And now we have something coming up called Yom Kippur.
Are you going to tell us about that?
Well, it's all part of a continuing story of forgiveness, yeah? It really started out because there was a day on the face of the earth when people offered sacrifices, and sometimes they offered sacrifices to their god or their gods that included their own family, their own children. Can you believe that? Well, God wanted to teach the world a lesson, and he did it with these two people, a man by the name of Abraham and a son by the name of Isaac. He wanted to show that Abraham didn't have to sacrifice his son. And in a book of Genesis in the Old Testament, it says, "And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns." And in that way, Abraham knew that he was no longer to follow the custom where men offered other men and children as sacrifices.
Oh, I'm glad.
And that is the whole story of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is coming up this coming week for the Jewish holiday of repentance and meditation. Well, there's a whole group of things go together, Maurice, all in this period of time. And I thought I'd have somebody explain it to us. And so I invited our friend, Charlotte Paul, to come visit us from the National Museum of American Jewish History, fortunately right here in Philadelphia. Hi, Charlotte. How are you doing?
Good to be back. How are you?
It's good to have you here because there are a lot of holidays crowding together right now. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and
Sukkot.
Sukkot.
Right.
Now that's like the Feast of Tabernacles.
Right.
And I wonder if you would explain it so everybody understands their separateness.
All right, I'll do it in order.
Okay.
Beginning with last Monday and Tuesday, we had Rosh Hashanah, and that means the head of the year. And that's the time that we go to synagogue and we pray and we start to think about what we want to do for the next year. We try to figure out how we're going to be nicer to people and if we can give more charity, anything that's going to make the world a better place. And we want it to be a sweet year. So we have a symbol, and this is a pot of honey and an apple, and you dip the apple in here, or you could dip challah, the bread, and everybody takes a bite. Take a bite. Now what does it taste like? Is it sweet?
Honey and apple.
Right, it's sweet,
Delicious.
and that means that you're going to have a sweet year. So when everybody comes in the house, you offer them this. So that's one of the symbols of Rosh Hashanah, and then we go to synagogue. And one of the things that you just mentioned about the ram, well, this is a ram's horn, and I can't blow it. But there are people in synagogue that blow it, and it sounds something like a trumpet. And it's supposed to wake you up and startle you and make you start thinking about what you want to do to change the year and make yourself a better person and make the world a better place to live in.
And that's why, because of the story of the ram and Abraham, that the horn, such a horn, is used. Okay, that's kind of like the new year. Now, how about the next, the holiest day?
All right, the next one is Yom Kippur, and that's coming Wednesday. And what we do then is very, very different from any other holiday. We don't eat all day long. And you wonder, what kind of a holiday is this where you don't eat all day long? Because we try not to think about anything except praying and atoning for our sins. So we fast from sundown to sundown.
Now this is a view inside the synagogue.
Right. And this is an ark. And see, the ark is closed, and then during the service, the ark is opened.
Now what's that inside?
All right. Inside, well, I brought you a pretend Torah. These are the Torahs in there. And this is what a Torah looks like. It's a scroll. And these are the first 5 books of the Old Testament, beginning with Genesis. And this is what we read. And the story that you just told the boys and girls is right here in this Torah. So we read it, and then we put it back in the ark. And we close the ark.
All right, now that's Yom.
That's Yom Kippur.
Now is it Kippur or Kippur?
Kippur.
All right, but you can vary it a little.
Right,
yeah.
right, a little bit.
Now with that we go from a serious day to now another festival is coming up.
A different kind of a holiday. 5 days later, a lot of people build what you call a sukkah. And this is what it looks like. It's a booth. It's you can make it out of wood. You see how this one's made out of wood, and you cover it, but you don't cover it completely. You have to be able to see the stars when you're sitting in here and eating. And this goes on for a whole week, and you hang fruit and vegetables from it.
Now this is just paper, and this is in a book. I've never seen one, but boy, I sure would like to really. Wouldn't it be great to really see one?
All right, I know exactly where you can see one right this minute. As a matter of fact, you can see it until October 15th at the Bourse Building. Do you know where the Bourse is?
Sure, down near Independence Square.
Right, exactly. Well, if you come in the 4th Street entrance and you walk up the stairs, right in front of you is a large sukkah, and it's the size of a room, and it has fruits and vegetables and nuts, and it's beautifully decorated, and you can see what a real sukkah looks like.
And when you see it, you see something that's thousands of years old. It's incredible. This is a wonderful season, a deep season, a happy season on the Jewish religious calendar. I'm so grateful to Charlotte Paul, for all the people down at the National Museum of American Jewish History for sharing the season with us. Coming up next here on board the Ark, we're going to find out.
In other words, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah.
Well, it is a season of gift giving, and there are gifts that are new and old. And we thought we'd find out what's new and old. You're looking at new and old right here, right, Penny? Now, this is Raggedy Ann.
Raggedy Ann's been around for...
On board the Ark. Yeah, we've been talking about the holidays of this season, one of which is called Hanukkah. And we're so glad to have Charlotte Paul with us today. Charlotte, so good to have you here.
It's great to be back.
Now, this is a happy time, right?
Yes, very, very happy time.
And the happy time is called Hanukkah.
Right.
What does that mean?
Hanukkah is the time when the temple was going to be destroyed by people who didn't want the Jews to continue practicing their religion the way they were. So they desecrated the temple, and when the Jews came back in to clean up the temple, they found there was just a little tiny bit of oil for the menorah in the temple, and they needed enough for a lot of light. So they had just enough, and miraculously the light continued when they lit the oil for 8 days. So that's why we celebrate the holiday for 8 days.
So, like the pilgrims came